Hello everybody and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today I'm about to show you guys a dupe that I found for the James Charles and Morphe palette. You know that palette that everyone has been going bananas over for months? Yeah, that one. I found a dupe and I actually like the dupe better than the original. So we're going to talk about that. We're going to discuss it. I'm going to show you specific shades that I've duped and I'm going to be telling you the differences of the little details that I found, the little discrepancies that I found in formula, in color, etc. We're just gonna really go in depth with this video. So I have the James Charles palette right here on my lap today. This is pretty much it. You've probably already recognized it from numerous other people's videos as well as Instagram. This has been sold out several times and is becoming very much of like a cult favorite among the various members of the beauty community. Now, I will say that there was a video that I posted, I think it was like a month or so ago, in which I talked about why I wasn't going to review this palette, and in a nutshell, I would highly recommend checking that video out, by the way, but in a nutshell, the reason I didn't want to review it is because there's so many shades in here that I found that I couldn't review and go through each and every shade in depth without basically devoting way too much time and energy to doing a consensus of one palette, because it's so large. So that's why, and I ended up not doing a review on it, but I found a dupe for it in a pretty unlikely place. This is an indie brand, and this is a smaller palette. This is the Colored Rain Vivid Pigments and Shadows palette, and if you open it, you see this beautiful collection of really vivid colors, and coincidentally, a lot of the shades are similar in both of the palettes. So hold on, this is so huge. So this has 39, this has 16, so there is a little bit of a difference in how many colors you're getting. But if you're looking at this palette, pretty much every single pigment in here is a colorful one, and they have like a variety of colors in here, such as a few oranges, a pink, a red, a yellow, a few greens, and a row, and a column of blues, and a column of purples. The purples I actually did use today to create this eye look, so you can see that I can create some pretty beautiful eye looks with this palette right here, and I actually love using this. I've used it so often ever since I got it. And then the James palette is this one right here, and you can see that they pretty much have like this beautifully curated selection of colors. The top section is supposed to be like really warm toned neutral kind of shades, even though you do see some colors pop up in this section. The middle row is supposed to contain colors that you use more of, and it's structured so that the colors that you use more often are in a larger pan size, and then the bottom two rows, like the bottom section right here, is supposed to be a colorful eyeshadow section filled with like a whole bunch of different colors. I don't know about you, but when looking at the James Charles palette and trying to decipher the ratio between colorful and neutrals, I find myself a little bit overwhelmed. So what I did is I basically did Photoshop this palette, and I blacked out the colors in one image, and in the other image I blacked out the neutrals, so you can kind of get a sense of just how many colors are in the palette versus neutrals. So I feel like that's really useful information, because you can truly get a sense of just how many colors you're getting in a palette that quite frankly markets itself as a very colorful palette. So with the graphics, you can see that this palette does contain quite an array of neutral shadows. However, and here's the kicker, I think that these are quite unusual neutral shadows, and I know that that's kind of like a little bit of like an awkward thing to swallow, because a lot of arguments can be made as to how innovative neutral shadows can actually be. However, I do think that you do get like very similar shades in multiple palettes, and a lot of times you are left with a selection of neutral shades that are, for lack of a better word, exactly the same. But with this palette, the neutral shades are a little bit different. I like how there is a difference between cool tone neutrals, neutral neutrals, and warm tone neutrals. You have a little bit of everything, so I do think that this is a pretty well thought out palette in that respect. And then with the colorful shades, you can see that there is a pretty strong presence of colorful shadows as well. I, for one, really like using a lot of these colors, and I will say that when it comes to this palette, I use use the mattes a lot more often than I even touch or even think of using the shimmers slash metallics. And that's, for me, like the selling point of this palette. It's definitely the mattes, because I feel like the mattes are pretty amazing. However, some of the shimmery slash metallics, not so much. I do find that occasionally this palette can be a little bit tricky to use. You definitely have to think about color theory. You have to be cautious. You have to be cognizant of what shades you're putting next to each other. And with this palette, it's very difficult to layer shadows successfully. However, okay, with this Color Drain Vivid Pigments palette, I don't necessarily find that same issue. This is again a pigments palette, but you can see that in place of including a bunch of neutral shades, that I have made this palette exclusively colorful. The only color in here that I would even attempt to classify as maybe a neutral is this shade right here, but when you put it on your eyes, it really just functions as more of a color, in my opinion. It's what would happen, I think, if you mixed a light brown with a very vivid red. I feel like that's the color you'd get, and it's a really unusual, really interesting looking color. However, I will say that with this palette, I find that I do not really have the same issue when it comes to layering colors, when it comes to blending colors together. I will say that working with pigments in general, and by the way, both of these palettes are pigments. They're not eyeshadow palettes, really. They're more like pigments. That's what they are. I find that working with pigments is a little bit of an adjustment, because for myself, like, I'm just not even 100% used to wearing pigments. I feel like it's a little bit of a learning curve using both of these palettes. However, I found it easier to use this palette rather than the James palette, because for some reason the colors layer better in this palette, in my personal opinion. Which palette do I like better? Do I like the James palette or do I like the Colored Rain palette? And I would say 100% I do like the Colored Rain palette better, because for some reason it's easier for me to use. I like certain shades in this palette better than the dupes in this palette, and I do think that since I'm a color lover, having a palette that literally has all color in it is kind of refreshing, because if you look at the James palette, I mean, you have a mixture of neutrals and colorful shades in here, you know? So that's why I hardly ever use like this top row, but I use this bottom row most of all, along with maybe say like these colors as well. But yeah, that's my thing. I feel like these two palettes are really great, but their purpose, I feel like, is slightly different. I think that the Color Drain palette is made to be for the color lover. It's made for the artist. It's made for somebody that really just wants to create really bold, vibrant looks, or use this palette to supplement other palettes as well. So the James palette is a palette that literally just has every single color you could possibly need. So if you are someone who's a makeup artist and you like to do, for example, weddings, okay, and at the same time you do editorial, I'm just like, you know, like just thinking off the top of my head, you really only need this palette, because you have your shimmers, you have your metallics, but mostly you have mattes. But what I'm saying is that you have the best of both worlds. You have your neutrals and then you have your colors. If you're somebody who, like me, who is very in tune to their colorful personality, really wants a colorful palette, then the Color Drain one is, in a sense, a better option, because you are paying for just colors. You're not paying for neutrals that you will hardly ever use, if at all. You're paying for really vivid, really bright colors. And I'm actually going to show you like swatch comparisons between the two palettes of shades that I find are very similar to each other. And you will hear me say that in a lot of cases, I actually do like how the colors perform in this palette better. So that's just my personal opinion. That's just my personal experience. I have been really loving both of these palettes, but I've been reaching for this one just a touch more. The first shades that we're going to swatch and compare are the yellow shades right here. This is the James palette, and in the James palette you have the shade called B, which is a matte yellow. However, in the Color Drain palette you have the similar yellow shade, but this is in the shade Lemon Drop, and it's pretty much the same color. So I'm going to get a swatch from both of these palettes. And then I'm also going to talk to you about the performance of these two yellows and how they compare with that. So this is Lemon Drop. and then this is B. So, right away you can see that these two shades are in fact very similar. This is Lemon Drop, and then this is B. So B has a little bit more of like a less of a golden undertone. It is a little bit more like yellow, but in essence the shades are very similar in tonality. However, I do think that B is a little bit less pigmented, and you don't get as much of an impact from B as you do with Lemon Drop. They are, again, so similar, especially in the swatches, but with my experience, I have found that I get so much more impact and so much more vibrancy from when I use Lemon Drop from the Colored Rain palette than I do with the James Charles palette. I did like a palette bingo, I think, with this palette right here. That was a collaboration with Anya and I'm, by the way. Loved doing that video. But it was basically a video in which I took Lemon Drop and I basically packed it onto the center of my lid. Well, I can't really do that with this James option because the color B right here isn't nearly as vibrant as the color Lemon Drop. So long story short, I just like using the Colored Rain version of the yellow more because I feel like it's better in my personal opinion. Then the next two shades I find are very similar. Unbothered, which is like this beautiful, like rosy, like just amazing color, and Mary, which is essentially a dupe. So let's swatch both of these. This is Unbothered, and then this is Mary. So, you can see that Unbothered is a lot more pigmented. I use the same pressure, I use the same method to pick up both of the shades on my fingers, so you can definitely see that Unbothered is in essence more pigmented than Mary, but on the whole, they're very similar. They are almost identical in tonality, and in performance, I'd say that they're the same, except that Unbothered from the Colored Rain palette is more high pigmented than the James option. Next, I have the color Splash from Colored Rain that, in my mind, is very similar to Rusted from the James Charles palette. So this is Splash, then this is Rusted. So again, very similar in tonality. Splash is a little bit more of like a more vibrant orange, and then Rusted is a little bit more muted, but they are very pigmented. However, of course, like I just think that Splash is a little bit more pigmented than Rusted. But then again, you don't really have to take what I'm saying to heart. You can easily just layer the colors onto each other, and then you can get some really serious levels of intensity. However, that's just something that I really want to note. I really want to emphasize the fact that there are certain differences in the formulas, but the shades are in essence very similar to each other. Then I have a comparison between this red color Sauce, which is this one right here, and You're Kidding.
I have wanted a true red color in an eyeshadow palette since I started doing makeup, and it does not exist. Literally every single red is either not pigmented or it tends to run too magenta or too orange. This is red. This is literally the best red eyeshadow on the entire market, and I can say that so confidently. That's You're Kidding.
He was basically marketing this particular red in the James Charles palette as like a complete show-stopping amazing red that not a lot of other companies had. I do think that that's incorrect. I think that there are many companies, especially indie companies, that have really amazing reds, but of course, like, I mean, I can't expect a mainstream YouTuber or Instagrammer to really just familiarize themselves with smaller indie brands. So that being said, let's compare Sauce with You're Kidding. Now, Sauce, I'm just gonna say right off the bat, is a little bit more of a darker shade compared to You're Kidding. This is what they look like. This is Sauce, and then this is You're Kidding. I do like the fact that the You're Kidding is such a this beautiful fire engine red. I feel like if Sauce was that, that would be amazing. But let's just swatch Sauce and then swatch You're Kidding. So right away, I'd say that these are two shades that are very similar in effect. They're a little bit different when it comes to color, but the pigmentation seems to be very similar. The blendability is great. I love how pretty much with every single swatch here, regardless of brand or palette. Every single swatch is very even, glides on very nicely. I don't really see any patchiness, and when I wear them on my eyes, I don't really see any patchiness either. So both of these palettes are really great, but then again, I'm just trying to like dupe the James Charles palette over here, which is why I'm just comparing like pigmentation. But let's move on to the next set of dupes. This is going to be Party Dupe, which is like this really bright hot pink from color Drain, and Skip from the James Charles palette. So this is Party Drip, and then this is Skip. So they're a little bit different in tonality. Party Drip seems to be a little bit deeper, but in essence, these two shades are wildly similar. They're very similar. In fact, I would say that if I wore these on my eyes, I don't think I'll be able to tell the difference. So that's another dupe. I'm going to move on to my other arm because this arm is getting rather filled up with swatches. Let's start off with some greens. Now, I have this color called Level Up, okay? This is a color that I was really excited when I saw it, and I had a similar feeling with Social Blade from the James Charles palette, which is like this really beautiful, like spring yellowy green. They're kind of similar in tonality, but at the same time, they're rather different. I would say that Level Up is a touch darker, that's it right there. And then Social Blade is more of a yellowish green. Both quite similar. I love both of these shades a lot and I use them constantly. They're both really great. I will say that both of these shades actually work better on the eyes than they do in swatches, which is why this looks a little bit lackluster, but on the eyes, both of these are absolutely amazing. Then the shade Squad is slightly similar, albeit a touch darker than the shade Daddy, which is in the James palette, which I'm also going to swatch for you guys. So this is Squad. And then this is Daddy. So Daddy is a little bit more of like a true green. Squad has a little bit more of a bluish undertone. But yeah, these two colors, very similar, both great, phenomenal colors that I absolutely love using. Drip Drop from the color Drain palette is quite similar, in my opinion, to Playground in the James palette. And here is Drip Drop. And then we have Playground. So again, both of these shades so beautiful and yes, practically identical. Then we have the color Jet Set from the color Drain palette. We have Brother from the James palette. Practically identical, very similar in tonality. Then the color Yacht Life from the color Drain palette, and then the color Cola from the James palette. These shades are a little bit different. Yacht Life is more of like a midnight blue. Cola is kind of, it's a dark blue, but it's a little bit more light. So those are the two shades, not quite exact dupes, but very similar. And then when it comes to the purple, I feel like all the purples are generally similar, but when it comes to a very strong dupe, I think that Vibes from the color Drain palette is similar to the color Single from the James palette. And here are the swatches right here. So you can see almost exactly the same. This is Vibes and then this is Single. So these are the swatches that I have for you. These are the comparisons between the James and the color Drain palettes. Overall, I'd say that both palettes again are pretty great palettes. However, I think that they are meant for slightly different people. I think that the James palette is more of an all-encompassing palette, and then the color Drain palette is one that I would recommend to somebody who already has a pretty sizable makeup collection, who doesn't necessarily need additional neutral shades in their collection. I feel like the James palette is great if you have a smaller collection, if you're just starting out. I feel like there has been really rigorous marketing surrounding the James Charles palette in particular, and that's why I wanted to create this video, because James Charles and the Morphe team have done a really good job of marketing this palette as a palette that is very unique, that has never been done before, and that is super, super innovative. And I will admit that I myself was kind of sucked into that marketing in the first place, because it can be really easy to look at something like this and think that, oh my gosh, this is so amazing, this is so innovative, I have to get my hands on it. But really, if you take a step back and if you look at it from a different perspective, you realize that this is not the first time someone has released a colorful palette, because let's face it, there are countless indie brands, there's so many people and so many brands that release, that use products that are colorful, that use shadows like these, that are even better quality. Because I will go as far as to say that I believe that the quality of the Color Drain palette is better than the Morphe palette. Now, I know nothing about ingredients, I haven't looked at the ingredients, so I don't really know much about that, but I have had a better experience, or a better set of experiences, using the Color Drain palette that I have had with the Morphe palette. That's just my experience, you know, and you can come at me, you can say that I'm not good at makeup, and I know that I'm not perfect, but that's just my experience. I feel like I like this palette better than this palette. And I feel like it's really important to always take what any brand, particularly a mainstream brand, and I feel like Morphe is a mainstream brand, with a grain of salt. It's just because a representative or a face of a product says that it's unique and that's never been done before and that is revolutionary, doesn't mean it is. These pigments were released before the Morphe palette, and you saw I pretty much duped the shades. They look very similar. In many cases, the Color Drain formula was more pigmented than the Morphe formula, and that's just something that I look at. I feel like pigmentation to me is really important, because I just really like working with pigmented shadows, even though I don't really mind layering occasionally, but that's just kind of what I wanted to get at, you know? Like, I feel like it's really important to make sure that you have a little bit of an open mind when looking at the makeup industry in general, because there are so many different brands out there that are on different levels of popularity. And I feel like it's really important to know that a lot of times you have different brands come out with different things, but at the end of the day, a lot of items can be very similar. You know, like this is just, I would say, the best example for a dupe in my collection that I have for the James Charles palette, but I could go into like a whole bunch of my other colorful palettes and pick up dupes as well. And I actually ended up doing that when I was trying to do some research for this video, but I feel like at the end of the day, this is the best dupe that I currently own for the James Charles Morphe palette. So yeah, that's pretty much the end of this video. I know, terribly long-winded. I am really a chatterbox, but I hope this video was interesting and informative and enjoyable for you. If you own any of these palettes, what are your opinions? Do you own either of these palettes? Do you own both of these palettes? And what is your experience? Which palette do you like better? Which palette do you use more? Which palette do you think suits your needs best of all? Because I feel like we all have different opinions when it comes to makeup, and we all have different styles. So for me, I'm someone that loves color. I'm someone that rarely uses neutrals. So I naturally prefer this palette. But of course, opinions are different. Let me know yours, of course, in the comments below. I will do my best to answer them. I know I've been terrible at that for the past few weeks, month, but thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video and found it informative, and I will see you tomorrow. Bye, guys.